Good evening. This is Faith Matters, and I am David Hennessy. I would like to take up today where we left off last week with my interview with Tim Francis. This is the third and last segment. Tim was hooked on drinking and cocaine and was on the verge at least twice of dying as a result. Once he passed out in a hot tub after downing a half bottle of Jack Daniels, and another time, high in cocaine, he passed out while driving at 60 miles an hour. Went off the road and came to a stop just yards short of a bridge. Tim has no doubt but that he was saved by his mother's prayers. So before continuing, I'd like to say that if by any chance you missed the last two programs or any other program, you'll find them on my podcast, Finding Happiness, on YouTube.
I'm going through all this stuff. I find out that I'm reading about all the truths about the Catholic faith, especially the Mass. And here's this lady, my mom sends me, and she predicts and has the stigmata. And this famous investigative journalist and his crew film her, not just having it, predicting it 2 months in advance. And if I can, David, I don't know how many listeners or who's listening, but regardless if you're religious or non-religious, I want you to go to a website. It's called Science Test, and test is plural, like, TESTS. So sciencetestfaith.com. Again, sciencetestfaith.com, and go to the About tab. You'll see me, and you'll see the actual video that my mom sent me. You can watch this. Nothing like this has ever been filmed in human history. So this lady has a stigmata. They filmed the whole thing from beginning until end.
Tim, as you were going to say, explain, are the wounds of Christ, which that's why it's a gift. You were saying it's a gift.
Jesus Christ essentially said, if you want to follow me, come after me, pick up your cross and follow me, right? And in Colossians 1:24, by the way, Paul says he's getting beaten in prison. And this is just one example in the Bible, okay? But in Colossians 1:24, he said, I rejoice in my sufferings. And he's getting beaten in prison. He said, I rejoice in my sufferings for your sake. And he said, in my sufferings, I complete what is lacking in Christ's sufferings, in Christ's affliction. And he said, that's for the body, the church. Now, in simple terms, it works like this. When we suffer, Christ is the head. So if your listeners can picture, just picture a human being where you have a head and you have a body. So picture that in your head, a head and a body. Christ is the head, and the body is believers that are connected to Christ. And if your back hurts, your head knows about it, right? If your finger hurts, your head knows about it. You stub your toe, your head knows about it. And so in a very mystical way, when we suffer, now somebody doing the stigmata, believe it or not, asks for this. They're called victim souls. They say, I want to suffer with you, Christ, yes, so that I can help other people. So when we suffer, if we give it to Christ at the Mass, which I'm sure we'll get into, then Christ is able to take that suffering, God is able to take that suffering and use it to help other people. I always tell people, if you like to help people, which I think most people do, when you suffer, because everybody's going to suffer, some physical, some mental, some, psychological, if you take that suffering and you bring it to a Mass, Christ takes that suffering and it helps other people in the body of Christ. In fact, if you believe in heaven or hell, and if you don't believe in heaven or hell, you haven't lived in my world where I've practically seen hell, right? And seen demons. But when you suffer, you can actually, like my mom prayed and brought her suffering all the time to the Mass, and it can save souls from hell. Now, by the way, a person once said, what makes you think you can live like hell and go to heaven? And that struck with me because I live like hell. I remember I was driving and I was on drugs, and it was 6 o'clock in the morning. I was at an all-night club partying, and somebody gave me some ecstasy, I think. And it was about 5 or 6 in the morning, and I fell asleep driving. And I flew off the road, and I was literally, David, about 10 feet from a bridge, maybe 20 feet. I was about 5 feet from a pole. I woke up way out into a field going 55, 60 miles an hour. No way I should be alive. The tow trucks couldn't even get to me. And I look back and I say, that's the power of a mother's prayer. Because if I would have died then, if there is such a thing as hell, which I, of course, believe there is, I have a book in front of me called The Truth About Hell. You can't live like hell and go to heaven. I think I would have went to hell if not for the power of a mother's prayer. I'll bet you anything you have a mother or grandmother, maybe a father or grandfather somewhere that's been praying the rosary for you, and you just thought they're wonderful people, but they're too religious. That's what we thought about Mom, right?
Yeah.
So 100%. And so just to back to that redemptive suffering, the bottom line is the ancient church, and I could go through all kinds of scriptures and quotes and stuff like that for you. It's in my book. But the ancient church always believed and understood in the redemptive value of suffering, that if you offer your suffering for other people, in particular at the Mass, that helps other people. And so I tell people, don't commit suicide. You're going to, when you suffer, you take it to a Mass, and if you like to help people, there's nothing you could ever do better in the world than praying a Mass. And that's the redemptive value of suffering. And so it's considered a gift because people are specifically getting the wounds of Christ, and they're doing that purposely to offer it up, to walk, as Jesus says, pick up your cross and follow me. And that's a big thing.
Which brings us back to the Australian man who was studying this lady who was to have the stigmata.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, his story is amazing as well, by the way, you know. So here he is, and you'll see this on my website. So he films this lady. My mom sends it to me, and here I see this lady have a stigmata. And now it would be like, I don't know what they have in Ireland, but here Bigfoot is this legend, you know, the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, whatever. It would be like if somebody sent me a tape of Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, because I didn't know anything about a stigmata. I didn't know anything about redemptive suffering. I just thought it was radically cool. Like, I couldn't believe, like, you can visibly see this on my website. If your listeners do nothing else, go to the website and watch that. And you're seeing this lady experience the wounds of Christ. From nothing to wounds that appear. And then this lady gets messages. Now, that's going to sound crazy to some of your listeners, like, oh, yeah, how can I know this from God? It's a fair question. You have to go to my website, and you go to her book called Jesus Speaks, and there's 4 videos so you can watch her getting these messages. But anyways, when I got that, I had 3 questions. One, is it real? If it is real, what does it mean? And I say, is it real, first of all? Like, did it happen? Okay, and again, how do you know if anything happened? Evidence. Now, if it is real, how do I know it's from God? How do I know it's not from a bad spirit? How do I know that, right? And the third question is, if it is from God, what's my message? Unfortunately, it took me 10 years to figure all this out. Why? Because in 1999, there was no book. There was no website. In other words, I couldn't get more information. And it wasn't for 10 years later, a guy called me who I used to party with, right? He doesn't even go to church. It's just my mom, there was a thing called a VCR, right, where you plug a VCR tape in. I used to show that tape of the lady having the stigmata to everybody I know, even though I wasn't going to Catholic church, because it was so cool. And everybody'd say the same thing. How come I've never heard of this? And 10 years after my mom sent it to me, my mother had died. And a guy calls me out of the blue and says, Tim, I was cleaning out my house and you left a tape there. And it was my mom's tape. So, David, I go, that's my mom on the other side, pushing me to this, right? And I said, I got to figure out what it is. I got online and I found a book and that said it was going to tell the whole story from the guy who filmed her have the stigmata. And when I got a hold of him from Australia, and they sent me all their stuff, like books and DVDs and all this raw footage. And, oh, my goodness, I found out about not only about the stigmata, but I found out about Eucharistic miracles. I found out about Our Lady of Guadalupe, which you went to Mexico City, so you know all about that. I found out about Fatima. I found all these supernatural occurrences at Padre Pio. I mean, Padre Pio bled the stigmata for 50 years. Go Google him. Go look up Padre Pio, listeners. You're going to be like me, like, how come I've never heard of this? For 50 years, Padre Pio could bilocate. He could be in two places at one time. When they dug him up, to this day, his heart is still in. I could go on and on. So I found out about all this stuff in 2009. And the biggest thing that happened to me is I got a hold of the lady's messages, the one that gets the stigmata. She writes nonstop. She wrote for an hour straight. These guys filmed her without pausing one time. And she has no religious background. She never finished 7th grade. She only speaks Spanish, but she writes in Latin, Greek, Polish, Italian. And the theologians of the church said her messages are nothing. There's no error. They're right in line with the ancient church, with what the church teaches. So I started reading these in 2009. I have a gift, David, a great gift. It's not my gift. It's God's gift. To anybody that, I don't care if you're skeptical. I used to be skeptical. There's a difference between being skeptical and closed-minded. So go get the facts. Go to my website. Watch the lady have the stigmata. And also do this if you can. I don't know if it's available to buy to go to Ireland. It will be shortly. It's not even off the printer press yet. But if you buy the ebook, I can get it to you without shipping, right? No shipping costs. She has a book I just got put together called Jesus Speaks. And if anybody reads that, they're going to be like, they won't be able to put it down. This is from the lady on my website that gets the stigmata.
And her name
so what happened to me, brother, is...
It's Catalina. It's Catalina Rivas, right?
Yeah, her name's Katia Rivas. She goes by Catalina Rivas as well. Again, it's on sciencetestfaith.com. You can see the video of the stigmata. You can see her getting the messages. And on the store, you can get her book, or God's book, called Jesus Speaks, approved by the church. You can also get my book. It's called From the Crack House to God's House. And you can get the guy who filmed the lady have the stigmata and a whole bunch of other miracles. It's called My Human Heart. It tells the whole story of Mike Willesee, because I'm barely scratching the surface. But I want to tell you what happened real quick. After I found out that it was real, based on evidence, I mean, just look at Mike Willesee's credentials, folks, right? I mean, this is the father of Australian investigative journalism, and he hated the Catholic Church, and he became a devout practicing Catholic because of this. I do want to talk about the confession and what happened with him here in a minute. But what happened is I brought him to the United States to do talks. Him and Ron Tesserero, who wrote the book, his attorney. And I said, this is 2009, I said, I have to share this with the world. That's why my mom pushed me onto this. It's not only true, it's real. I started, believe it or not, I started going to daily mass in 2009 because of these messages. And I tell people this, I've been traveling for 15 years in the United States. I went to Canada maybe once. I'll go anywhere. People say, can you come to here? Yeah, I will. It'd be expensive. I'm not going to pay for me. You have to pay me back on my travel. I don't charge anything to speak, but I can't afford to fly everywhere, time and money, right? But I've been putting on multimedia presentations, and your listeners can watch some of them online. In fact, email me from my website, and I will email you several presentations that were filmed. So you don't have to wait for me to come there. You can see this. And I'm blessed to share and show all these miracles, but most importantly, the meaning behind the miracles. Yes. And I assure you one thing. Here's what happens. That if you are looking for more peace in your life, whether you're rich or poor, if you're trying to understand the meaning of suffering and why do bad things happen to good people, right? And you've been turned away because of suffering maybe. If you want to know why the Catholic Church is the ancient church, that the ancient Christians, how they practiced and believed, and this is no insult to non-Catholic Christians. We consider them our brothers and sisters, but they don't have the Holy Eucharist. They don't have the sacraments. They don't have confession, which we'll get into. I'm telling you, you can get all of that. Get a hold of me, and I'll get you an ebook. Or on my website, you can get an ebook for like $10 or something like that. I also have an audiobook of my book you can get. It's called From the Crack House to God's House, and I read it myself because I'm like, I want to read the book, and so that's on my website as well, which tells the entire story. But if I can, David, and stop me if I need to, I want to talk about Mike Willesee's actual conversion, his story that happened. I think it's an amazing. Should I stop or should I go into that?
Go into it.
Mike Willesee filmed, and you'll see this on my website, Remember, the father of Australian investigative journalism, more skeptical than anybody could be, all the resources to prove something wrong. He films the lady have the stigmata, and he doesn't convert. Let me repeat, he does not convert. And he died in 2019 of throat cancer, and he wrote a memoir of his life. And here's a guy there's a guy named Muhammad Ali. Most people know who that is.
Yeah.
And Muhammad Ali was going to fight Joe Frazier for the third time. It was called the Thrilla in Manila. And Mike Willesee, if you Google Mike Willesee and Muhammad Ali, Mike Willesee got the entire week with Ali. I'm saying that because that's his credentials. He had all the credentials. And at the end of his life, he told this guy, and you read about this in his book on my website, My Human Heart. He told his attorney on his deathbed, he said, "Thank you for turning me on to the biggest story of my life." He wasn't talking about Ali or some war that he did. He was talking about filming the lady have the stigmata. But yet he didn't convert for a year later. Here's how he converted. A year after he filmed what you'll see on my website, he owned a hotel in Australia, and he turned it into a fancy restaurant. And upstairs he had his office. So he paid for Catalina Rivas, who lived in Cochabamba, Bolivia at the time, and Father Renzo Cecilo, her spiritual director. You'll see him in the video on the stigmata. He paid for them to come to Australia. And in his memoir, on his deathbed, he's reflecting back on this. And he's going, I don't know why I didn't convert back in 99. After filming the lady have the stigmata, he saw so many miraculous things. And he said, I don't know why I didn't convert. Like, I don't have an explanation for it. But a year afterwards, he invites them to his hotel. And he's proud, as he says in his memoir, I'm very proud of my restaurant. And you got to remember, Catalina and them are very poor. They live in a very poor place in Cochabamba, Bolivia. And he's very wealthy, so he wants to give them a treat. So they're sitting there, and they've got this restaurant, and there's like, you can picture 5-star chefs and all that kind of stuff. And the steak's about to come out. Now, Australia is known for their steaks, right? And here's Mike Willesee, the father of investigative journalism, this big money tycoon. And he's got all this stuff, and the steaks are about to come out. And Father Renzo Cecilo says to Mike, have you had your offices blessed? And Mike kind of laughs to himself because he's thinking, I haven't even had myself blessed. But just to be kind of respectful, he says, no, Padre, I haven't. And Father Renzo says, would you like to? Now, they're just about to bring the steaks out. They're sitting at the table. And Mike to himself thinks, well, sometime in the, sure, that'd be great. Thinking, yeah, sometime in the future we can maybe do that if it makes you happy. And right when the steaks come out, Father Renzo stands up, and Mike is irritated inside. What are you doing? Here come the steaks. You got to eat them while they're hot. And Father Renzo starts walking towards Mike's office, which is just across the way. And Catalina Rivas, the lady who has the stigmata, follows him. And he's kind of irritated. He wants to get back. And then Father Renzo points to a particular room, which is like a tea room. It's as Mike says, the most insignificant room in the whole office. He says, what's that? And Mike said, well, Father, that's a tea room, And so Father Renzo starts walking to the tea. Now, by the way, one thing I left out. On their way walking to the office, Mike is thinking of something. And Mike says, I don't even know why I brought it up, but he says, he told Father Renzo, he says, hey, Father, sometime in the future, like sometime, not now, I'd like to talk to you maybe about a confession. Now, this is a year after the lady had the stigmata, right? And Mike says, I don't even know why I said that. So then they get to the tea room. When he says to Father, maybe sometime I'd like to talk to you about confession, he says, Father doesn't say anything. And he says, that's weird. I thought, I hadn't been to confession for 35 years, and I'm bringing up confession. And he says, sometime let's talk about it. And Father doesn't say one word. He says, if I was a priest, I'd put a rope around somebody and bring him in there right then, right? Uh-huh. He says he doesn't say a word. But when they get to the tea room, he closes the door. And he says, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And he offers him confession because Mike asked about it. And Mike says, I almost said no. Not now. It's been 35 years. The steak's almost hot. I've got so much stuff. He said, but for some reason, there's that some reason again. For some reason, what did I do? He goes, I let it out. And he said, I was bawling. He goes, now listen to this, and I'll finish this story. He said, when I came out of the confessional, he said, I was bawling, and Catalina Rivas was sitting there, the lady who had the stigmata, who gets the messages from Christ. And he said, and she pulled out from her dress a prayer card, and it was Jesus, Father, holding the prodigal son. And Mike says, what, does she have a prayer card for every occasion? She knew because Jesus told her that that's the moment that Mike was going to offer confession. And from that time on until 2019, David, Mike Willesee spent his time showing people the world and helping Ron Tesserero, which is written in their final book called My Human Heart, which again is on my website, the truths of the Catholic Mass and the faith. So that's the moment he started to practice his faith. And I'll just end that story with one more thing. In the messages that Jesus gives to Catalina, the stigmatist, he talks about fighting. Now, this was big for me because I got in a lot of fights in the bars, okay? And he says, the first time you get hit, it doesn't knock you out. It stuns you. Now, sometimes we knock people out on the first hit, I know. But he says it stuns you. It's not the first hit. He said it's the second, third, and fourth hit that knocks you out. He said it's the same with sin. The first time you do something that you know you're not supposed to do, it bothers you. But after you've done it 3 or 4 or 5 times, you become numb. Now, anybody who's ever murdered anybody, I haven't, but I've talked to them. The first time they shoot somebody, it's tough. But the 10th time, they're used to it. And so sin becomes a habit, and you become closed. And the reason that Mike Willesee didn't convert after watching the Stigmata is because he'd lived a life of complete self-pleasure, materialism, right? Voted richest 200 people in Australia. And it wasn't until he had a confession where his soul was wiped clean. And by the way, if people are going, I'm not going to go to confession to a priest, haven't you heard about all the perversion, all the sexual scandal? First of all, there's more sexual scandal in schools historically than there is in the church. I think it's all awful. It's ridiculous. I hate it too. But there's always going to be evil. But I want you to hear this. The personal holiness of a priest has nothing to do with the sacrament of confession. Now, most of the priests I know, my gosh, I couldn't imagine giving up women. They do it by choice. Most of the priests I know are very, very solid, virtuous people. But they're human beings. But the power of the sacraments, the Mass and confession, has nothing to do with whether or not the person is a nice person, whether he's holy or what have you. And that confession is just absolutely, it's like spraying bear spray on your soul, and bears, which are representative demons, cannot attack you. That's how I would look at it. So I talked a whole bunch. I probably talked too much. I could keep going, but David, if you want to ask or input and ask some questions and lead me down another path, you'd let me do it.
I'd like to finish with your own experience of confession.
Thank you. Absolutely. So let me just say, Saint Padre Pio, my favorite saint, the one that had the one that had the stigmata for like 50 years. He said some interesting things, right? He said confession is the soul's bath. He said you must go at least once a week. And I thought, what are we talking about? Going to confession once? Why would I do that? Well, there's about multiple saints who used to go to confession every day, and here's why. St. Pio says, imagine you have a room in your house that nobody goes into, like everybody's moved out. He said, and nobody goes there. He said, go back in a week. Leave it alone for a whole week. Go back in a week, and there'll be dust in that room. And he said it's the same with your soul. And so for me personally, I attempt to go to confession on a very regular basis because there's a saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. My experience with confession is that it gives me supernatural strength. Now, people could say, David, well, that's in your head. But the evidence, the biblical, historical, and supernatural evidence is that it's not in my head. Okay, but what if it was? What if it was? Here's what I know. It allows me to live a life of peace. It gives me the ability that what I never had before. I didn't have moderation. Temperance was not my thing. I always go overboard historically. And so it allowed me, I've been married now 25 years, I have 3 kids, and the marriage is never perfect. It's tough. But it has allowed me and my wife to be able to lead our family and to the best of our abilities. Not that I don't almost come close to falling. I do. If I stay away from the sacraments, I can get myself in real trouble. If I go to a nice party in Cancun with an all-inclusive, I got to be careful because I can get myself in real trouble. right? Because of the moderation. But that's what it does. It's the best for me. Is example is that I'm trying to keep bears away from my family, and confession is like bear spray. And the greatest bear spray there is the Mass, because Jesus said, "If you eat my flesh and drink my blood, I live in you, and you live in me." Think about that. If you eat my
And
flesh and drink my blood, I live in you, and you live in me.
we
And that's
couldn't
exactly.
we couldn't finish on a better note. We couldn't finish on a better note, Tim. Tim, it's been a joy speaking with you. It's really been a pleasure, and I want you to promise one thing, that you'll come back.
I'd love to, and you mentioned me coming to Ireland, so let's get that scheduled. I'd love to come. I've never been to Ireland. Let's
Well,
get that scheduled. We'll go have 2 drinks, no more than 2 for me. I'll bring my wife so I don't go nuts, and we'll go have 2 beers, good Irish beers. I think the pubs sound wonderful to me, but and then we'll go to Mass every single day, brother.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, God bless you. God bless you, Tim, and we'll be in contact.
Thank you. Thank you, David. God bless you. Thank you.
Take
Thank you,
care.
Patricia. God bless.
Well, many thanks for listening in. Don't forget you can listen back to this program or previous programs on my podcast, Finding Happiness, on YouTube or Spotify. I look forward to having you back with us this time next week. And for now, good night and God bless.